Hey everybody, before we get started, two very important updates. First of all, if you're still looking to get the translated German Army regulation of the medium tank company that MHV and myself are self-publishing at the moment, head over to Indiegogo. There's about 10 days left. We're actually approaching 500 books sold, so that's pretty awesome. Thanks very much everybody who has already pledged. If you're looking for it, well, the link, you will find it below. And second of all, for the upcoming video, our chat on the Battle of Midway, the upcoming movie Battle of Midway, Justin and I, we couldn't really go into everything we saw in the trailers and the teasers, but if you're listening to this as a podcast, that might become obvious. But if you're watching it on YouTube, just with the actual visuals, you'll see that sometimes we've added a little bit of extra information on the actual screen. I thought I'd point that out because I know some people watch my videos as a sort of podcast, so you might be missing some things, but it's, really just the nitty-gritty details at that point. In any case, we couldn't cover everything, but I hope you guys enjoy. Right, hello everybody, and welcome back to Military Aviation History. I'm your host, Bismarck, and today I am joined by Justin. Hello, Justin.
Hello, happy to be back.
Yeah, so we thought that we'd make a little bit of a fun episode this time around, something we haven't done before, and let's talk about the upcoming movie Midway, directed by Roland Emmerich, and obviously depicting that fairly important battle in the Pacific, 1942. Now, Justin himself, he has already made a huge breakdown of all the points he sort of has on the movie over on Twitter, but we thought of expand it a little bit, bring it over to YouTube, talk with you guys about it, see what you think, and just see where essentially we expect this movie to go. And interestingly, there's good and there's bad. But then again, this is Roland Emmerich we're talking about, and considering his track record, I think it's always going to matter the expectation and what people want in a movie, right? There's people that just want a symphony of visuals, right? Where it's just beautiful, everything is done, CGI is on point, the practical effects are on point. For me, historical movie, I really don't care that much if the explosion looks up to snuff.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I wouldn't even go down to the route of saying I want to have a realistic historical movie, because we're not going to get that in the first place. And second of all, for me, more important there is sort of a respect for the overall theme of what happened, that there is no major mistakes, that there is, and the mistakes that are sort of can be explained as to why they crept into the production, and then just a general sort of authenticity that surrounds the movie, that where I can say, you know what, I see what they've did here, I understand why they've gone a certain route.
Yeah, that's very well put. I'm the exact same way. I was quite nice to Dunkirk when it first came out, because I understand Christopher Nolan and his particular style of direction. For one thing, he hates, I shouldn't say hates, but he doesn't like using computer-generated effects. He likes as much of it as possible to be practical, which of course imposed restrictions on Dunkirk. You weren't going to have 30 Spitfires fighting 60 109s and all these Heinkels everywhere, because the second you get into that scale, you're not going to actually have enough aircraft around anymore.
You're also not going to have the insurance for that.
The insurance for that, yeah. Things have changed since the the Battle of Britain. That was in the 60s, right? 60s. Yeah.
So
they got away with a lot you wouldn't get away with now.
Absolutely. And they still had flying Heinkels back then as well, which they don't have anymore, even though they were the Spanish equivalents. But enough about Christopher Nolan, enough about Dunkirk. Let's talk about Midway, coming out this year. So you've already made a pretty cool breakdown here, but essentially what I take away from this is there are some surprisingly good parts to this movie shown in the trailer, the teasers, but then there are also some things where it's just questionable as to what exactly their inspiration there was. So if we just, for example, start with the simple fact that the movie is called Midway, and where do we start out at? We start out at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, I really don't like this, simply because the movie has to cover a lot. Mm-hmm. And to throw the attack on Pearl Harbor in there, I feel, and I'm almost guarantee it's gonna be the opening action sequence.
Pretty much.
And I really don't like it. The movie has to do so much. It's gonna be bloated, which is another Emmerich hallmark. His movies tend to be trying to do everything, and they end up being really long and incoherent in parts. And I'm worried that it's going to go this way. I actually, personally, if they had to have like some kind of nod to the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it was because it was a very important event, obviously, in the mindset of the U.S. Navy after the attack. But that opening scene of like the Enterprise returning to Pearl would have been like, that would have been more emotionally impactful to me as the opening scene than the gratuitous Pearl Harbor action stuff. He's doing like manipulating people's emotions. They're doing, the kid staring at a disaster trope from the teaser.
Yeah. And the thing is, by now everybody knows what happened at Pearl Harbor.
Well, like that, yeah.
That is the one thing that I think everyone knows, at least on the US side, about World War II. Retaking that, considering you already had a movie about that, well, it was a horrible movie anyway, and that also wasn't only on Pearl Harbor, that was also on a whole thing, including the Doodle Rate. But I absolutely agree with you that emotionally and also from a stylized point, just having Enterprise come back into the harbor and seeing this absolute massive destruction laid out before them would have been a lot smarter. And it was also have driven home the point that you were making about, people at the time really were shocked at what happened, and they really wanted to strike back, essentially. And then there's one other thing I think that we can also apply to the whole movie, or the whole trailer that we've seen so far. The movie isn't out yet. That is that, for example, during the Pearl Harbor scene, it seems that the torpedo bombers are attacking from the wrong angles and so on, but you actually have a caveat on that, and essentially saying, this is artistic sort of license of having a tracking shot, I think, was what you said.
Yeah, that is what I strongly suspect is Roland Emmerich wants a lengthwise tracking shot down Battleship Row with all of the different types of aircraft attacking. Yeah. To you and me, or to people that have a better understanding that, it looks dumb, but you know what? If everything around it is okay, like, I can shrug that off as just a silly thing that happens for a filmmaking reason. For another thing, and I slowed the teaser down because I have like no life. I spent hours in this when the teaser trailer came out, going frame by frame, and some of the B5N2s are strafing while they're doing this, and it's like they have no forward fixed armament. There's lots of little nitpicks difficult. Like that, but yeah.
And then we, of course, come sort of to the next big point that is made in the trailer, and that is,
if we lose the Japanese on the West Coast.
In the immediate wake of Pearl Harbor, there was a lot of this kind of what we would, in hindsight, think is as like a rational fear and anxiety about all of this, because it was just such a shocking thing. I mean, it seems so mundane to us now because everyone talks about Pearl Harbor and we all know the spoilers. We know who wins and all that. But at the time, it was very shocking. So there was that kind of paranoia. Of course, when it's woven into the trailer like that, it's also implying to an audience that doesn't know better that those are the stakes, that Japanese are going to invade the West Coast. No.
Which at this point they were far from doing, and even if they wanted to, I mean.
No, it was beyond their ability. The only thing they were considering is further, and I should specify who they is, because the Japanese were not a hive mind. The combined fleet staff under Admiral Yamamoto was considering at this point an invasion of the rest of the Hawaiian island chain. They did actually have the army on board. It had started some planning. Of course, with the result at Midway, that stopped pretty much cold on the military side anyway, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But that was about as far as they were thinking. And honestly, when you look at the kind of invasion plans they were putting together for Hawaii, it's pretty unlikely it would have succeeded. But
moving on then, we have the actual air combat in the movie, which seems to be somewhat of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because we see one or two scenes there as like, that's pretty good. Mm-hmm. And then there's this whole, we have to upscale Red Tails in a way with, what's the good old quote? Show them a little trick I learned.
Yeah.
Which has become an internet meme at this point in the aviation community.
It's one of the funniest sequences in cinematic history.
I'm gonna show them a little trick I learned.
that is the only reason why I can still watch that movie. It's just that one scene. Show him a little trigger alert, and then he just, yeah. And that
45G loop.
Yes, absolutely. It's gonna work like that. We have Dauntlesses doing, what was it, hammerheads, like stalling out on purpose with their air brakes, trying to make Japanese Zeros overshoot and all that good stuff.
I groaned when I saw that. It's not even a realistic looking hammerhead. It's like a sped up movie version of a hammerhead, and Dauntlesses aren't doing that. It was goofy. Now, I will give them the credit that at least the hammerhead, even if it's a sped up movie version one, like at least it's like a real air combat maneuver. I know.
It just seems, that's one of the things where I'm like, yeah, they've definitely looked at Red Tails and they just want to make it more Red Tails.
And it stands out because a lot of the other air combat we see looks actually pretty decent. Like, I think the best shot that I saw was in the teaser, and that was during the TBDs during one of the carrier raids, which we'll get into because I think that's by far the most interesting aspect of this movie.
Yeah.
That looks great. Like when they're making their torpedo run.
That now. Yeah, we can go into that now, actually. Well, there is the bombing of Midway that happens in the trailer as well, which for me seems to be like a whole massive sort of air fleet flying in more or less perfect formation, dropping bombs. That's a trope that has been done a million times before.
Yeah, and it's funny because of the altitude a lot of them are coming in at. It's like you could see B5N2s with loadout, and the loadouts may or may not be, as far as I can determine, they're incorrect, but whatever. They're coming in at 300 feet. I'm like, really? Yeah. And that's that's a thing through the whole movie is things tend to be low.
With the thing with the whole movie is that the formations, I think this is because maybe they're trying to have more planes in the shot, or they're going to have this idea that the air formations are perfect and then the fleet formations are like sort of perfect as well, where they're super tight on display.
The fleet formations are goofy looking simply because people will probably know, okay, the Japanese, they operated their carriers close together. And then I think in the popular mind, they think it's close to something in my car. Where it's never, they were never really closer than 8 kilometers. In reality, we have very detailed tracking charts. And actually, you can see them in Shattered Sword. They actually have it for various different periods of the battle. They're operating in standard Japanese at this time box formation for their carriers. They're about 8 kilometers in between them. Their escorts are further out. The closest things to the carriers when they're launching anyway would be the plane guard destroyers to pick up any air crew.
Yeah.
But in some of the shots, you could see there's 2 Kongo class, and then there's all these destroyers and the carrier, and they're all 500 meters apart all around, and it looks silly. But again, I understand what they're doing for an audience.
Yeah, because I also have to sort of defend Midway here a little bit in the sense that when I make my videos, some of my videos, especially the ones I do in the Pacific, I still use IL-2 1946, Battle in the Pacific or whatever it was called. And I also, initially, the first time I made a mission with all the planes, with all the ships as well, I sort of spaced them out at more or less the historic spacings. And I've noticed that once you start filming, you only see one ship. You don't see the other ships. So I had to pull them tighter together. They're not in a perfect formation. They're sort of spaced out a little bit. It's a little bit made at random. But I've always made sure that you have enough ships on screen just so you understand that this is a fleet battle. This is not just a couple of planes attacking a single ship. So I have to defend them a little bit in that sense. And I understand where they're coming from. But it might just give people the wrong impression. That's the trade-off there that we, I guess, have from a visual spectacle and what actually happened. But talking about fleets, movie obviously Midway is about attacking a fleet. The Japanese attacking the Americans attacking the Japanese. We have the TBDs. The TBD torpedo bombers. Although they also seem to have bombs in the trailer, which is somewhat bizarre.
Yeah, that's one of those. I think you have a theory, but I can't, because they clearly have some technical advisors that really know their stuff, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in a second. But those kinds of these kinds of little weird errors come in where you're maybe they misread something, or you could expand on that.
Yeah, so there's one little scene where you see a TBD, which, by the way, I love that the TBD is getting a little bit of a light shone on it.
Oh, yeah.
In this movie, but you have it dropping a torpedo, and you can quite clearly see bombs attached to the aircraft as well. I'm not quite sure what made them do this, because if you actually read the manual, if you look at the performance of the aircraft, only having the torpedo was already tough enough on the machine. And the same thing goes for just having the standard sort of bomb loadout, 1,000 pounder or 2 500 pounders and so on. There is also the option of 12, 100 pounders? Or was it 50 pounders? I have to actually check that. And those would be those would be set differently. But what I think is what happened here is literally somebody read an old article or an old book where it said TBD Devastators attacked with torpedoes and bombs. And in their mind, they put those two together and said, well, the TBDs that attacked had torpedoes and bombs. Or they misread as like, oh, it's capable of, using torpedoes and bombs. And they were like, oh, yeah, okay, so they must have used that. And it is actually, considering how it is in the movie, it might actually be deleted. Maybe somebody fact checks that. And if there's no real artistic reason to have those bombs in there, like they're dropping them later on for whatever reason, I don't know why they would do that. They might still take those out. I mean, I presume from a visual render perspective that is relatively easy to do.
Yeah, and there's another, and I guess linked to that, because there's literally one shot, and only one shot in the teaser, where the zero is the wrong color.
Yes.
And every other shot I've seen, the zeros are the correct color. So I'm wondering if that one particular shot was from an older version or something like that, and then somebody eventually told them that they don't have the dark green zeros at this point in the war, and then they went back and changed it. That could be a possibility. That would make more sense than just randomly having one wrong colored zero.
My little conspiracy theory is here that they've just put stuff out, and then they're going to look through the comments section on YouTube about all these experts out there, including us armchair experts here. And they're just like, oh, so this is wrong. Okay, we'll fix that quickly. And that's why, we'll see maybe another trailer. And by the time the movie comes out, it's an absolutely perfect depiction of the most recent historiography. Which brings us to the point which actually is important, because it seems that there are, when it comes to that fateful attack at Midway, when the American dive bombers attack, Akagi and Kaga. Although Akagi only gets free aircraft, and Kaga gets a whole bunch of them. Yeah. I mean, Akaga was not going to leave. That's just how it is. Akagi could have made it, and perhaps if it wouldn't have been for that one lucky bomb. But they seem to be actually embracing here the modern historiography that is not going with the fateful 3 minutes and the the carrier decks full of aircraft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one of the biggest points in the movie. It genuinely shocked me because, of course, I mean, for decades in the historiography, we portrayed it in this way in English, where it was very dramatic. I don't have the exact. I wish I had Fuchida's exact quote on hand, because he is by far was the most influential in English on this note, and he had it's a beautifully written book. And he was like, the first zero for the escort of the strike group had just started to take off Akagi's deck, and the decks were filled with the strike force. We were going to go and destroy the Americans, and then the dive bombers attacked and blew it all up. And that was our understanding for decades.
Because that's the only source we had.
Yeah, basically.
In the English-speaking world.
Yeah, we heavily relied on this one translated source. Little did we know that Fuchida had been discredited in Japan since the 70s. Yeah. It took until 2005, really, with the publication of Shattered Sword, for that to make its way over the Pacific to our historiography. It was in a rather amusing fashion, where one of the authors for Shattered Sword, he wrote a letter to a Japanese scholar. And he worded it very politely, because he was finding inconsistencies in Fuchida's account versus the documentary record. But he didn't know that in Japan, he thought in Japan, Fuchida was still revered or whatnot. So he wrote this really respectful email to a Japanese scholar, and then the Japanese scholar replied back, and his opening line was something like, to understand why Fuchida's book is a pack of transparent lies. And that's when the light bulb went on.
Which is one of those perfect examples of how little we in the English-speaking world still know about Japan and the Second World War.
Yeah, there's a lot of gaps just because of the language barrier.
And I'm just hoping that a lot of the books that were written in Japan and a lot of the articles there will make it into the English-speaking world at some point.
Mm-hmm. But I guess to go back to the reason how we were able to confirm this is, again, because I have no life. I was going frame by frame and seeing the diving shots, and I was able to identify. We haven't seen Soryu yet, which was the other one hit in the attack, but we have seen Kaga and Akagi. And I've positively identified them. It's actually pretty easy if you know what to look for. Akagi had a portside island, and also it literally had an katakana A for Akagi, just in case it wasn't obvious enough. But you can clearly see that there is only a handful of CAP zeros, combat air patrol zeros for fleet defense on the deck at the time of the attack, that's perfect. I was genuinely shocked when I saw that. And the one shot we have of their attack on Kaga, similar deal. It's a much blurrier. It's a very quick shot, but I was able to identify the katakana Ka on the stern, and the flight deck is basically empty, devoid of aircraft, which is that's great. I was really happy to see that. Let's just
hope it stays like that, and they're not going with the need to have planes spinning off the flight deck. I see explosions are happening. Talking about that specific attack, Japanese AA seems incredibly strong.
Yeah, and
the Dauntless is like ducking and weaving through shot down aircraft seems a bit weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a movie thing.
Yeah, that's a movie thing.
The AA, the only Japanese carrier that actually shot down one of the SBDs in the actual dive was Kaga, which is pretty unsurprising because Kaga had the heaviest AA of any of the Japanese carriers.
Well, it's also that everybody went for Kaga.
Yeah, there was a lot to hit too.
It was a target-rich environment, and the fact that they only got one is even a bit bad.
Yeah, and it's a nitpick, but yeah, like the AA is over the top, extremely heavy. The Japanese wish their AA was that good.
It's a movie thing. It's the same thing. I don't know if you've seen Catch 22, the new sort of series on this. The AA is absolutely bombastic. You know, I don't want to say I wish the Germans and the Italian had that much AA, but I wish they had that much AA because they didn't.
Yeah,
it's a movie thing. Ever since I don't know, like Memphis Belle or something, it's been like this. We are going to talk about the G3M2s.
Oh yeah, so this actually happens much earlier. So it's not even during the Battle of Midway. And this is that's what made me excited, is when I first saw the teaser, there was like a half-second shot of somebody using a Chicago piano, a 1.1 inch AA mount, and they were shooting at something, and I'm like, my radar went off, because for those of you who don't know, I have an undying love of the G3M, and I'm just like, oh my god, and I paused and I went back, and I'm like, it totally is a flight of G3M2s. And there was a couple other shots in the teaser that were very clearly indicating they were going to do the carrier raids beyond Doolittle. So the ones that were happening in the Central Pacific. And I'm like, that is awesome. We've never seen that. Very few people would know really anything about it. It's an absolutely fascinating chapter of the war. And in particular, this one sequence with the G3Ms, it happened almost exactly as, at least from what we can piece together in the trailer, almost exactly as they portray it, which is awesome. The only thing I can really nitpick is, from what I can determine, the G3Ms were carrying anti-shipping loadouts, 2x 250 kilogram bombs. In the trailer, they're carrying 8x 60 kilogram land bombs, and also those don't look like real 60 kilogram Japanese Navy bombs, but whatever. The overall sequence is perfect. And yes, for those of you that probably guffawed when you saw it in the trailer of somebody on an SBD turret like shooting at a G3M with both engines on fire, and then it like dramatically rams into and cuts the tail off the SBD that's manned and like cartwheels into the ocean, and you probably like, no, that literally happened. The only thing that that is different is that the guy that was manning the SBD turret, he didn't, hit him and light the other engine on fire. It sounded like, at least from what I can piece together, it was already coming in and just the guy was on the turret shooting at it. So that's like a little bit of artistic license, but overall,
it's also perfect. A little bit of detail, which is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. That they put and that they have the exact way of how the G3M sliced through the SBD and how it hit the aircraft, the carrier, is quite, is symbolic of the fact that they were doing some research for this.
Yeah,
but then again, why not take the correct bomb loadout? 60 kilogram bombs aren't going to do anything against carriers, but whatever.
The only thing I can think of is that they wanted more bombs.
Again, it's a movie thing.
Yeah, it's a movie thing. And I really like that it seems to be focused overwhelmingly on the TBDs and SBDs. I don't think we've seen a single Wildcat. I'm sure they're going to be in the movie, I'm sure, but we haven't seen
there's got to be somewhere in the background in the trailer as well, and somebody will tell us in the comment section if we missed them. But generally, they're focused on the TBDs and on the Dauntlesses, and I think that's a good thing. And also, what you said, I mean, earlier we were sort of criticizing the fact that they were sort of rehashing Pearl Harbor again, and then we actually do like the fact that they are going into the carrier raids that haven't really been portrayed in the movies yet. We don't know how long that is going to be in the movie. Maybe they're just considering it around this one bombastic moment where they get attacked with by the G3M.
That's my guess, because we also see them attacking, I can't remember the name of the island off the top of my head, where they blow up, I think it's you could see 6 G3Ms blow up. They damaged, or they destroyed one on the ground, if I remember right.
That's
another movie thing.
Yeah.
It's not very exciting if you see them, mostly ineffectually bomb, and then they damage some aircraft and blow one up, and then they leave. You need to blow up half of the Japanese naval air arm.
That's the thing with movies. You always have to show exaggerated damage for people to understand, right, there was damage. And if you only hit, let's say, if you drop 500 bombs and you only hit one aircraft, then everybody's going to be like, well, that was useless. And whereas in actual fact, that attack might not have been useless for X, Y, and Z reasons, but let's not go into that for now. I think that's a relatively concise breakdown, as concise as we could make that, of sort of our view on the Midway as the trailer is. We haven't seen the movie, of course, yet. We'll wait for that to come out, and then we'll see if we're going to watch it or not. I'm sure there's gonna be another trailer hitting it sometime soon. Overall, I think my verdict would be, yes, it's an action movie. It's going to take a lot of liberties, but it is, in a sense, good to see that they took some reference from the new historiography on the Battle of Midway that has not really permeated or penetrated sort of the popular idea of what the Battle of Midway was. Mm-hmm. Specifically, of course, the planes on the decks, which I think most people still haven't realized that the new historiography moved away from Fushida's account and has debunked it in a sense.
Yeah, my impressions are very similar. I have a lot of reservations because I do not like Roland Emmerich. He hasn't made a single good movie. That's not... I should qualify that. A single good movie that's like a cerebral kind of smart movie. His best movie is Independence Day, which is over-the-top schlock. And that's kind of his filmmaking style. Exactly. I like that movie, but that's why I have a lot of reservations. However, they clearly have tried in a lot of areas. They clearly have some advisors or people that know a thing or two. Like a lot of things. One thing we didn't mention, I won't go into much detail, but the ship modeling and all of that is fantastic. The technical stuff, the handful of shots I've seen, even though I have a lot of reservations, the shot of it was very quick in the trailer where the lookouts on Akagi notice the dive bombers coming in, and I'm like, it's perfect. And then there was a brief shot of the 25 millimeters, the Type 96s.
Yes.
They look exactly correct. I'm like, I got the feels a little bit there that somebody cared enough to get at least that stuff right.
And before the movie comes out, we can't really judge.
Yeah.
So this is all based on the trailers. We'll see where it goes. If you guys have an opinion about the trailer, if you have an opinion on the movie, if you want to see Justin's breakdown again on Twitter, link is in the description below as well. Please let us know about your comments, and maybe you have a different idea to us. Maybe you have a I don't know, a theory about why certain shots are the way they are, please let us know. And yeah, that's essentially us done for today. Thanks very much, guys, for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, hitting that bell button so you actually get a notification when I upload a new video, because YouTube will not tell you. Check out our Patreon to support future videos. Thank you very much once again to Justin for joining us and sharing some insight on his on the Pacific, and his obviously expert status in that theater of operation. And yeah, we'll catch you guys later.
Today we proved the American Navy isn't a joke.